Hello. We will look at two different examples or two different methods that you can use to iterate through elements of an array in JavaScript. Those two methods are the for loop and the forEach iterator method. If you would like to follow along with these examples, I have posted them on the course website. There are two examples that we're going to be working with. The first one is a list of grades. The list of grades represents the number of points earned by a class of students out of 40 possible points. So for each grade item, we will calculate the percentage earned for that particular grade, and then we will aggregate and calculate the grade average for the entire class. The second example will demonstrate how to use the forEach loop, where we will iterate through a list of high and low temperatures, and then we will build a table based off of that data. So let's go ahead and get started. I will start with a review of the HTML file. As you can see here, it divides into two sections. The first one is where we're going to place all of the elements for our grades, and then the second one here will be for the temperatures. The temperatures, the aggregated data for each section will be placed in the paragraph tag, and then the itemized grade items will be placed in the unordered list, and then the table data will be added to the table element in the second section. Let's first review the existing JavaScript code that is in the file. I have several variables already declared, the first one being the grades array, several working variables to hold the sum of the grades and the average. I also have variables that reference the HTML objects, specifically the ones for the unordered list in the grades area and the paragraph tag. I also have references to the table in the table section for the temperatures. The first loop that we're going to look at is the for loop. This is where we're going to define our for loop and use the loop variable as our index value. So for. Now the loop variable I'm going to call index. I can call it anything. And I'm going to give it the initial value of 0. The next thing is the condition. So while the index is less than the length of my grades, and then I will have my increment here. So here what we're going to do first, once we have the loop header set up, we need to grab the element that we're going to be working with from the array. So I'm going to first define a variable called element in this case, and I'm going to set it equal to the value from the grades array using the bracket notation. Once I've done that, what I want to do is then take the individual grade item and I'm going to average it in order to create the percentage. So I average the particular element, I divide it by 40 because the total maximum points is 40, and then I multiply it by 100. Next I want to, this is just to demonstrate how we can take individual items and append them to the HTML DOM. So I'm going to now create a list item, and I'm going to set the text content so that I am displaying the output, so which is going to be my raw score, which is the element from my array, and the calculated percentage, which is the average item. And notice that I'm calling the toFixed method so that I round up and limit the number of values to the right of the decimal point. Once I have set the context, the text content, I am going to get the grades list, and I'm going to append this list item to that grades list. Now remember, one part of what we want to do is ultimately get the entire grade average for the entire class. So I need to sum the grades. So I will use the accumulator pattern to take the current value of the sum of grades and add in the current grade item. So now, after the loop finishes, after we've iterated through every item in the array, I am going to calculate the overall average for the class, calculate the percentage, and then update the text content for the paragraph element. Now when I refresh the page, you'll notice that I have the raw score and the percentage for each individual grade item. So just summarizing, what we did with this particular loop was use the index value, the loop variable, as my index value to select elements from my array. Then I can perform calculations on that data and manipulate the DOM for each element in the array. Also, I would like to note that this for loop is incredibly flexible. I can break out of this loop if I chose to. Also, instead of incrementing by 1, I could also increment by 2. So instead of going through this list of, I think it's 28 grades, then I can go through and going every second grade, I will cut my list in half. So to demonstrate, now my list is only 14 items long, incrementing my index to look at only every second element from the array. Next, we will look at the forEach iterator method. There are a couple of items to note that are a little bit different. And first is the use of the dot notation to access the method. The second is the argument to the forEach method requires a callback function. And that callback function requires up to 3 different formal parameters. The basic syntax for the forEach loop requires that you reference the array variable. In this case, it's going to be temps. And then the forEach method is accessible using the dot notation. So notice that the method utilizes a capital E for each, and the argument for the forEach method requires a callback function. We will define an anonymous function to handle the callback. So I'm going to define function here inside the parentheses. So the anonymous function can define up to 3 formal parameters. The first parameter represents the element from the array. I'm going to call it element. The second one is the index value. And the third one is the array itself. Now the second and third formal parameter are optional, so I am going to use the index, but I will not use the third parameter, which represents the array itself. So the element, since it's the individual element from the array, item from our temps array, I can go ahead and start working with it directly. So I'm going to take and I'm going to create my variables, high and low. I want to mention that each individual element from the temps array is an array itself. So what I'm doing here, in order to get the high temperature, I am taking the element and I'm getting the first sub-element from that array, and then the low temperature is the second sub-element from that array. Now I'm going to take the index value and I'm going to use that because there's a relationship between the temps and the days. Both the temps and the days array variables have 7 elements. So I can use the index value to access the day of the week. Down here I'm going to say let days or day equals days and then the index. So now I'm going to calculate the daily average. The daily average will be the sum of the high and the low temperature divided by 2. So now I have everything that I'm going to need in order to start building my table. I have the day, the high, the low, and the daily average. And again, all I'm doing here is that I'm creating a table row element. I'm creating a table header for the day. And then I am going to set the text content for that particular column element. And then I will append that column to the row. And I will do that for each individual column. So I'll have 4 different columns. And then once I have finished appending all of those different columns to the row, I append the row to the table. So now when we save our program and we refresh, we have a dynamically created table. So we have two examples here, a forEach loop and we have a for loop. And you might ask yourself, well, which one's better? Which one do I need to use? And the answer to that question is not straightforward. It can be depending on what you want to do. For example, with a for loop, you can skip every second index value. You could also break out of a for loop, which is something you can't do with a forEach loop. ForEach loops are great if you just need to iterate through every element in an array and you need to manipulate those elements in some particular way. So it really depends on what you want to do and in terms of which method of iteration you use. So hopefully this has provided some insight as to how you iterate through elements in an array.